Hi, this is Well, and welcome to our last webinar. This is titled You the Leader, and it's one of the most important pieces of information to actually communicate to others. I use it a lot in my coaching, and even though it's called You the Leader, it's really about you just leading your life. And it's really based on the theory of personality that has emerged from a number of sources. Jonathan Haidt is a famous psychologist from NYU who really talks a lot about this. But what it really focuses on is what do you really want from life? What do you really want from work? And how do you respond to the ups and downs of life? And it's really based on these components of personality. One is the genetic component, which I'm going to explain in a minute. The other is the adaptive part. In other words, how do you adapt to your environment? And the other are the five voices that are in our heads that are constantly talking to us. So it's our genes, our environment, and our voices that really determine how we make decisions in our life. One of the easiest ways to see this, and it's really going to be part of your assignment at the end, is to map your life on something called a lifeline. And just to make this easy, I mapped Steve Jobs' life, and you can see there's sort of a center point and then highs and lows. So you can see that he was born in 1955, but he was given up for adoption at a very early age. So that's kind of a low point. But then a high point is he was adopted by a very loving, stable family, and he grew up in Palo Alto, which was an growing middle class, which now, of course, is a very affluent area, and he was surrounded by very well-educated families. And one of the people he met was Bill Hewlett, who was the founder of Hewlett Packard. And he was really encouraged at a young age with his interest in technology, coding, and hardware. So he started college at Reed College, and Steve was always kind of a maverick, and he dropped out after a year and didn't know really what to do. He got a job at Atari, but he was so difficult to work with. He had very poor hygiene. I'm not making that part up. A lot of people didn't want to work with him because he kind of had an odor. And so he was actually fired from Atari when they were the first game company that was really growing. And he went to India. And in India, he had a very important kind of spiritual awakening. And what that did for him was really help him focus on the voice of his intuition. And that'll become important later. When he came back from India, he co-founded Apple. That was great. They went public. Of course, he made a lot of money at that time. They had a Super Bowl ad that really promoted Apple as kind of the anti-hero in the computer business against IBM and so forth. And then he tried to create a computer called Visa that was going to blow away Apple II, which really Steve Wozniak created. And it was a big fat failure. And he was getting more and more arrogant, and he ended up getting fired. So that was a big low point. He started a company called Next. He was really excited about it. Didn't really go very many places, but he had enough money that he acquired the company Pixar, which we now recognize as famous as an animated movie company. And at Pixar, he met a man named Ed Catmull, who was the CEO of Pixar, and Ed became his mentor. Of course, Pixar was really successful, but his own business, which he really wanted to build a computer business, Next was going nowhere. So again, he was at a low point. But Apple was starting to fail, and they actually acquired the operating system of Next. That's what we know now as the Apple OS system. He became CEO of Apple, and look, he created all these wonderful things that we all enjoy, and made a famous speech at Stanford in his final year before he passed away. That is one of the most viewed speeches on the internet about the importance of living life in a way that really is the fullest expression of your inner values and inner vision. So as you can see, here's a very successful entrepreneur, one of the most famous people in the world, and he had all these turning points in his life. He had all these times of highs and lows, and what I'm going to explain to you is how you approach the low points of your life will pretty much determine the high points of your life. So let's take a quicker look at what makes up personality. So there's something in our genes that give us a tendency to either be very threat sensitive or opportunity seeking. And that's called our genetic personality. And a way to kind of know, the American Psychological Association came up with questions that are like this. So on the one side, under the adventurous questions, you have questions like this. And the question is, what do you identify with the most? If I don't like what's going on, I try to change things. The world is progressing, and generally things are better now than they used to be. I feel like I can learn almost anything. When I see something I want, I go for it. And that's contrasted with another genetic type that is more, I'm good at adjusting to most circumstances. In other words, I'm not really trying to change things, but I'm really good at adjusting, making the most of what's going on. Generally, things used to be better and more stable than they are now. Most of the time, mistakes are hard to fix, and I worry about the future quite a bit. So it turns out that people generally fit into these two categories. Now, of course, it's all sensitive to circumstance. So sometimes you might be on the stability side, and sometimes you might be on the adventurous side. But if you look at your life over a long period of time, how do you think friends would describe you? Are you more interested in stability and therefore more threat sensitive, or more interested in growth and adventure and therefore more opportunity oriented? Now, you can affect this, but by being conscious of it is the greatest way to control it. Because even though adventurous sounds really attractive, you can really spend your life just going from one flower to the next and not really accomplishing anything. On the other hand, even though stability can be attractive to some people, you don't want to be stuck in the mud and miss a lot of opportunity. So the balance between the two is important. And what's important to notice is that most of us aren't really balanced. We tend to gravitate towards one or another. And the more stress we're under, the more we're likely to revert to the genetic type that we have. Now, on top of our genes, we have what's called our adaptive personality. And our adaptive personality, we can either adapt in a healthy way or adapt in an unhealthy way. So a way to look at our adaptive personality is just how we grow. So when we start off, well, as soon as we become verbal, that is, as soon as we can talk, we start to having self-talk, and that's a conversation that's going on inside our heads all the time. Now, when we go to school or we may have authoritarian parents, they're telling us all the time what we should do, what we should think, whether we're bad or good, and so forth. And those messages are very hard to fight when you're young because you don't feel a real sense of an individual identity. So often we adopt the opinions of others. So if someone is telling you that you're just nothing but a problem and you're disobedient and you have low potential or it's hard for you to learn, those are very powerful statements that get in our heads. On the other hand, if people are telling us that we don't need to change anything and we're perfect in every way, then those are real powerful statements that actually might hurt our growth and development. Now, as soon as we get into junior high age, we begin to go through the pain of social comparison and the opinions of others, and those really start to fill out these voices in our heads, which I'll explain to you in a second. Then we have life experiences, and all of us have victories and defeat, and how we explain the causes of those victories and defeat end up being our strategy toward success in life. And they either tend to amplify that we're an adventurous, we're going to try a lot of things person, or we're a stability seeking person. And so all of this life kind of forms a story. So what transpires during this whole growing up process is the development of 5 voices. I just was researching this one PhD who's done probably the most work on our inner voice, and she has clearly identified 5 voices. So there's a compassionate voice that we all have, and that's the voice that says it's okay to make mistakes because you're still really a smart, capable person. There's a motivational voice, which is telling us you can do it. There's a critical voice that says no matter what you do, you're going to fail. Why do you think that way? You're an imposter. You're really not as cool as people think you are. There's the analytical voice that is saying, well, what if I do this or what if I do that? And we're always trying to gather data to make sure that we make good decisions. Then there's an intuitive voice, which is our gut feeling. Like my gut's telling me not to trust this person, or my gut's telling me I should really trust this person, and so on. So all these voices are present in our head. Turns out they're fairly distinct voices. And for most of us, almost all of us, the loudest voice we have is the critical voice. And that's the voice that is very limiting. Now, how we respond to that critical voice ends up being very determinative of how we describe our life or how we have a life story. So that generally in our life story goes one of two ways. Either we're the hero of our life, meaning that no matter what happens, we seem to dust ourselves off and pick ourselves up and move on. Or we have a victim story, like no matter how hard I try, things don't work out for me. So I'm going to just show you my lifeline. I'm not going to go into detail. I've got a dramatic story, just like you do. We all do. And my dramatic story, if I start after I graduated from college, I bought a business. It was a sandal manufacturing business, really a tiny one. I'm a surfer, so it was really exciting to have a business where we made flip-flops and sold them to surf shops and then department stores, and it really took off. And then I went completely broke. And the reason I went completely broke is the economy collapses in the late 70s, and we also had foreign competition. So I was on top of the world, then I was so broke that I couldn't buy a hamburger. Then I met Stephen Covey, and we started the Covey Leadership Center, and um, wasn't that easy. It took us 6 years to really have a breakout success. And what I learned from that is never stop if you really believe in something. I really believed in our message in that business. And then after years of success, as you can see, my father passed away. Stephen Covey's son became the new CEO of the Covey Leadership Center. I got divorced, never thought that would ever happen. And I had a problem with a teenage daughter. And what I learned is that very bad things can happen no matter what. No matter how hard you try, no matter how hard you think this will never happen to me, and I'm lucky or I'm fortunate or I'm trying to be the best person I can be, doesn't matter. Um, then I was recruited by a good friend to start a coaching business called Inside Out. And what I learned from that is just keep going. Don't give up. Don't stop. Just keep going. Uh, I got married again, and I had a difficult situation with another person who came into the business. My second marriage didn't work out, and I went through a period of woman hating. For those of you who know that I'm famous for advocating for women in leadership, you probably never knew that I was the other guy, but I was. And what I learned down at the bottom, and that was really the darkest period of my life, is that a bad story will definitely depress you. But then I got a vision of what I really wanted, and I started a new business, which is the business I'm in now, which is really about empowering people and creating empowering cultures. And I love what I do. And I met my third wife, Debbie, and that was 18 years ago this September. And how I feel about my life is, of all people, man, I wouldn't trade with anybody. I feel I'm so fortunate. So what did I learn? What was my life lesson? Stay calm because life is long, and stay true to your best self. So that's my lifeline and what I learned. Thank you for going along that journey with me. As I mentioned, I'm sure yours is equally interesting. If it isn't yet, I'm sure it will be, because there's nothing you can do to protect yourself from the unexpected. Now, this is what I'd like you to do. As I went through that lifeline chart and came up with the life lessons, I was really cognizant of what voices did I listen to, particularly at the bottom of my lifeline, and what voices was I listening to that made me vulnerable, maybe at the top of my peak experiences during my life. And the reason I'm saying this is one of the highest measures of emotional intelligence is being conscious that the voice inside you, you're in control of. That it's not a voice outside you, that you can control that voice. And the critical voice is the one that you want uh, to keep away from the other four voices that are much more useful. In fact, I consider the critical voice an external hurricane, like a storm that comes on shore and just floods you with negativity and emotions and terrible things. And you've got to keep that critical voice basically outside of your main thinking and look at your other voices for critical decisions and so forth. So here's my assignment: create a personal lifeline map and ask yourself at each turning point, what voice were you listening to? And was it a voice that lifted you up to the next level, or did it keep you down in that low point, in that point of self-doubt or a confusion? Based on your life lesson chart, what voice should you be listening to more often? What was the voice that really helped you find your way up again? And that's the voice that you want to really nurture. If you see a success pattern in your life, how would you describe it to someone else? Just like on my life lesson chart, life is long, stay true to yourself. And of course, so I'm listening to the voice of my intuition, but I'm also listening to my voice of meditation. And when things are really bad, I certainly listen to that voice of compassion. Right now, the question I have, maybe you're facing a test decision. The reason you know it's a test decision is maybe you're avoiding making the decision. Maybe you're under an illusion that you'll get more data. Now, maybe you could get more data, but lots of times we feel stymied from making a decision that we already know what we should do. We already know the decision we should make, but we're hesitant to make that decision. And so I'd like you to go and call on your positive voices and get their thoughts. So one of the things you can do about your voices is ask yourself, what would my motivational voice, my can-do voice tell me? What is my analytical voice telling me? What is my intuitive voice telling me? And what is my compassionate voice telling me? You won't have any problem knowing what your critical voice is telling you, but that's the voice where you almost always get stuck. So, and write it down, by the way. When you ask yourself what these voices are, write it down. Well, obviously, if you're listening to the four positive voices, the constructive voices in your mind, more often than you're listening to your critical voice, your life will get above the line and stay there longer. That would be my life experience that I want to share with you. And those of you who have been to one of my longer seminars have known that several years ago I climbed the Matterhorn with my son, and I had my critical voice all the time I was climbing that Matterhorn uh, telling me I couldn't do it, that it was way too hard. And just look at it, it was really hard. But by following another voice, the voice that was the motivational voice that was asking me, so what can you do? Because my critical voice was saying, what, you can't do this, you can't do this, you can't do this, you're crazy to be up here. My motivational voice just kept saying, what can you do? And the main thing that I answered is, I can keep going a little longer. And that's all I needed to do. And I stood on top of that mountain, and I could see Italy and France and obviously Switzerland. And just look at that mountain. That was impossible. When I've gone back there, I still don't know how I did it. But I learned three things that day, and I just want to reiterate with those three things because they've been life-changing. One is know why you're climbing. Life is a climb. There's no question about it. But know why you're climbing. And for me, I was climbing with my 15-year-old son. And the only reason to climb ultimately is for love. Second, climb with great companions. Yes, develop relationships in your life that are incredibly supportive in the most positive way. And third, you have no idea what you're capable of. There are times in my life where I just thought I had completely failed at all the important things in life. But I found that if I just didn't give up, it wasn't true. And I have to say, I wouldn't trade places with anybody. And I hope that's how you feel too. And you can, no matter what, you can. And that's my wish for you. That you'll stand on the top of your game. Well, thank you very much. It's been great to have this experience with you and to read and listen to your feedback and talk to some of you about your feedback. And my greatest wish for you is success and happiness always.